I want now to talk about the human law, and then I'm going to put natural law thinking and human law thinking in dialogue with each other and talk about the moral implications of them. Okay, so Article 3 of question 91, Aquinas writes, or this is the question whether there is a human law. He says, Augustine distinguishes two kinds of law, the one eternal, the other temporal, which he calls human. Okay, so in addition to the natural law, there's also the human law. And it might actually be useful here if I put a little graphic up here. I'm going to erase this now. And let's think of this. The eternal law can be subdivided into different components. In addition to the natural law and the divine law as subcomponents of the eternal law, there are also laws that don't pertain exclusively to human beings, that are components of the eternal law. Okay, but we're only going to focus on the parts of the eternal law that pertain to human beings. We've talked about the natural law, at least I've introduced it. The human law for Aquinas is man-made law, the laws of the state of Texas, on the books in Austin. Okay, they're probably no longer on some codex in a basement. They're probably all on computers now. But they are written down, and that's basically what they are. They are man-made constructions which are intended for a variety of purposes. Now, this is important. Most of the time, in most societies, the human law manifests or embodies the underlying natural law for Aquinas. That is, there is an element of the natural law in the human law. But sometimes, and this is where it gets interesting and the really important philosophy gets done in exploring natural law thinking, sometimes the human law does not embody an underlying natural law. Okay, and sometimes the natural law is not actually actively manifested for its part in the human law. And that's where it gets really philosophically interesting. Okay, one more comment before we get to those interesting, juicy cases. The divine law. The natural law is a non-codified set of moral principles that all human beings have access to in their heads. Everybody, even the non-redeemed. Aquinas is a Christian. He thinks that the Muslims have access to this. He thinks that the atheists have access to this. The Hindus, the Buddhists, everybody has access to the natural law. The natural law, if properly followed, can lead to a flourishing life here on earth. Okay, the natural law includes within it non-codified principles that say things like don't steal, or respect others with dignity, okay, or don't kill, don't murder, that is. You can kill, but just don't murder. Don't lie. Okay, stuff like that. Those are components of the natural law. If you follow the natural law, then you can have a successful life. You may not always be financially successful, you may not always be politically successful, but you will be morally successful here on earth if you follow the natural law. And Aquinas thinks that actually lots and lots of pagans, having the natural law written on their hearts, live morally upright lives. Okay? Not everyone does, but if they do follow the natural law, then you can be a pagan and live a very morally upright life, because you are acting in accordance with the sense of morality that God has imparted to all people. But, and this is important, the divine law is necessary, even in spite of that natural sense of morality that all have. Okay, and this is Article 4. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of all the reasons why it's necessary, but I commend that article to you. The core reason why the divine law is necessary is because the natural law only directs us towards our temporal ends. It does not direct us toward our eternal ends. In order to be truly, deeply successful as a human being, not just temporally here in this life, but also eternally in the life to come, it is necessary that we follow the divine law in addition to the natural law. And the divine law is best thought of in terms of the Old and New Covenants. Old and New, okay. The Old Testament contains within it a sacrifice system set up for the Hebrews. They were led to believe that that sacrifice system brought about the propitiation of their sins and directed them towards a spiritual, eternal end that would give them salvation. Turns out, we find out in the New Testament that that sacrifice system was simply a picture of the ultimate sacrifice, a representation of the sacrifice of Jesus of Nazareth, which is the true sacrifice for all time, and the others are simply pictorial representations of that. Okay, so really the old law folds into the new. Okay, the new divine law is that body of principles which, if followed, will enable us to fulfill our eternal end. And it's basically real simple. It's just the salvation plan. If you believe in the sacrifice of Jesus of Nazareth on your behalf, you have faith in that sacrifice and in his rescue mission, taking your sins upon him, assuming your guilt, your punishment in your place, and you simply accept that rescue mission, then you will be acting in accordance with the divine law, and you can fulfill your eternal end. Simple as that. Okay, the divine law is that body of principles which enables us to achieve our eternal end. All right, now I want to go back to the purposes and more juicy parts of the natural law. But let me stop and ask if there are any other questions at this point. So some of you may have seen this kind of a diagram before, but let me use it again. Apologies if you've seen it in my political philosophy class. Let me use it again as a way of thinking about the connection between natural and human law. So here's the natural law, and here's the human law. And for Aquinas, the great majority of laws fall under the second category here. Okay, the great majority of natural laws and human laws overlap. I mentioned driving on the right-hand side of the road earlier. That's an example of a law that embodies within it actually an underlying natural law principle. The natural law principle is something like respect innocent human life. Even though it is not a law that explicitly says respect innocent human life, it explicitly says drive on the right-hand side of the road. Still, it embodies within it an underlying natural law principle. Okay, we have other laws against shoplifting. We have laws against perjury. We have laws against tax evasion. We have all sorts of laws across this country dealing with a variety of different issues, and they all embody within them an underlying natural law component. Especially interesting, though, are laws here and here. So some moral principles are embodied in the natural law that are not embodied in the human law. Okay, so some things we know to be right, and yet the law does not punish infractions against them. So for instance, the lies we tell. Americans on average tell more than 5 a day. Okay, very surprising number. I'm not sure how loose the definition is, because that's like way more than what I tell. So I'm not quite sure what the definition is. I actually have been telling more lies recently as a parent to my children as they like ask more questions. It's kind of been disturbing to me. But like you can't tell them the whole truth sometimes about stuff, because the truth is like too horrible. So when they ask you questions, like deep questions about why somebody died or somebody got killed or something, you just kind of tell them a just so story. Anyway, eventually they will find out the whole truth about somebody's death, and like then they'll be older though then. Incidentally, I'm not lying to my children about Santa Claus. Like, so this is the funny thing, right? So my children will be growing up as theists, believing in a divine figure who, you know, their atheist counterparts don't believe in, right? Their atheist counterparts believe this to be a fiction, like a myth, a mythical thing. And yet all those atheist parents, many of them, not all of them, will be telling their children stories about Santa Claus, who really is a mythical figure. And my children will be the ones in their school classes who are going to be telling them, you know, your parents are wrong. It's like my children will be the ones standing for like the hardcore rationalist view, disabusing the others of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus. So anyway, at the same time, I don't want them to be spoiled sports. Okay, so lies. There are lots of other things. Okay, people can have affairs, right? Marital affairs. Violations of natural law according to Aquinas. Our human laws don't punish them. Okay, unless it's like an underage affair, in which case the law of the state of Texas gets involved. Otherwise, you can sleep with whoever you want in accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, as long as there's consent. Yeah?
Is the underage law a natural law?
Is the underage law a natural law? Yeah, absolutely. According to Aquinas, it is. Right, I see what you're saying.
I would think not.
Right, I see what you're saying. Okay, I misunderstood your question at first. I have never heard a response to that before, so I do not know what a natural law person would say. You want me to shoot from the hip?
Go for it.
Sort of.
Doesn't mean in the Bible if you have 15-year-old women being married off to 30-year-old men, something older.
Yeah, but what you want to look for is passages where the Bible's commending what's going on. Because there are like lots of polygamous passages in the Old Testament, but there isn't actually commendation ever stated. It's just a recitation of what they're doing. So it says so-and-so has 4 wives, but it doesn't say, and God approved of this or something. So you want to look for a little more precision there. That's a great question, man. I'm going to say intuitively, if the 16-year-old girl wants to marry the 32-year-old man, yeah, fine with me. Fine with the natural law, probably.
See,
I mean, after all, that's Jesus' parents right there.
Yeah, and Joseph and Mary. I said that too, and a lot of people are really kind of off-color disgusted by that. And I'm kind of like, don't understand where those intuitions are necessarily coming from. I mean, there's one thing of like if an older person is manipulating a younger person.
Yeah.
That's a totally separate issue.
Yeah. No, I get it. There is in our current culture, because of strong contractarian influences, this notion that there's an age of consent.
Yeah.
And if you have a certain level of rational capacity, which we are arbitrarily set at 18 or whatever, then you are consenting. You are capable of consent. But that's totally, it's totally a derivative of 18th century contractarian, Enlightenment era contractarian moral thinking. Basically, the notion being morality is derived from a contract between 2 parties. It's not the way previous peoples would have thought about those kinds of relationships, for sure. previous peoples would have looked in a much more friendly way upon adult-youth relationships. I don't know how young the women can go for previous peoples to still see that as in accordance with the natural order of things. But yeah, I mean, the Hebrews are marrying girls off at 13. So I would assume that probably it's something like that. That's a great question, man. I'm so glad you asked that. And I totally misunderstood your question at first, so disregard the first response. Yeah. Wow. I could totally go freewheeling on that question for a while. We could speculate wildly for a bit.
You know what? Write me a 2,000 to 3,000 word paper. I'll grade it and get back to you.
Touche. Okay. So you can have an affair. You can lie. There are lots of things that you can do. When I was 8 years old, I stole my neighbor girl's baseball cards. Okay. The law is not going to punish me for that, right? But it was against God's moral law. Okay. So there are things in the natural law that we don't get punished for. Okay, and there are also some gray things, Grandma asks you at Christmas, tell me what you really think of my fruitcake. And you say, what I really think of your fruitcake, Grandma? It's the worst I have ever had in my... No, you don't say that, you lie, right? And you say, well, this is really a wonderful contribution, Grandma. Okay, it's a lie, right? It's not punished by the human law. Okay, so it's in the natural law, not the human law. Okay. Human laws that are not a part of the natural law are also really interesting. This is what Aquinas likes to focus on because it's the most philosophically interesting. There are certain kinds of laws of the state of Texas, maybe now in the state of Texas, definitely in past epochs, that Aquinas would say do not embody the underlying moral principles of God's natural law. What kinds of laws are these? Well, I'd probably step on toes if I pointed out contemporary laws that Aquinas would say that with regard to. But let me point out past laws, because that's probably less controversial. In the 1930s, the National Socialist government in Germany passed the Nuremberg laws. Nuremberg laws, very famous, stipulated that Jewish shopkeepers could not sell to Gentiles. They stipulated that Gentiles and Jews could not intermarry. They could not copulate. Okay, Nuremberg laws stipulated that there had to be segregation between Jews and non-Jews. Okay, these laws do not embody the underlying moral principles of the natural law, which specify, which urge or compel us to treat all persons with dignity and respect. Nuremberg laws are laws of the land. They were legitimately passed, but they did not embody underlying natural law content. Okay. Other examples: antebellum slavery in the American South would have been said by Aquinas to be in violation of the natural law. Aquinas advocates slavery, but not slavery on those grounds. He advocates more like a debtor's prison style slavery. If you can't pay your debts, then you can go into an indentured servitude for 7 years or something. Okay, but slavery on the basis of the chattel system, where you are enslaved just because you're from a particular ethnic group, no. That does not embody the underlying natural law. It disrespects basic principles of human dignity. Okay, it's a human law, a man-made law, which is not embodying within it the moral principles which God has placed in our minds. Okay, I could point to other laws, but maybe we kind of get the point. Dictators can pass laws about laws that are genocidal or laws that are klepto, right? If they want to steal from the people, they can do that. But it doesn't make it actually a law that embodies the underlying natural law. This is probably, certainly very famously articulated in the 1960s during the civil rights struggle, because the law of the land in the American South at the time was based on segregation. Namely, the best way to set the society up is to give African Americans their own water fountains, their own bathrooms, their own bus locations, right? And give the whites their own schools, their own water fountains, their own bathrooms, etc. Okay, a segregation style system that set the society up. And in Martin Luther King Jr.'s Birmingham jail letter, he knows his Aquinas really well, and he uses Aquinas as the justification for his opposition to segregation. Okay, the opposition that MLK articulates against segregation is based on this notion that there are two laws. And the visible law is not the final word. It is simply the public face. And sometimes it actually doesn't accord with the final word, which is the underlying natural law. Okay, and MLK quotes Aquinas in the Birmingham jail letter. He says, an unjust law is no law at all. If it is a human law that does not embody the natural law, it is here in segment 3. Okay, he didn't say segment 3. But it is a human law that does not embody the natural law, and it is not a law that we should be obeying. Okay, and this was his justification for his civil rights protests and his social unrest, which it was very controversial at the time. It was really controversial because he's not obeying the law. He's doing this kind of passive-aggressive, stand in the roadway type thing where he's not going to obey the law, but he's not going to actually use violence to oppose it. It's sort of like a kind of middle-of-the-road, sort of peaceful, but like it's kind of passive-aggressive because he's like not getting out of the way. That kind of thing, right? And he articulates his opposition to these laws of the land by saying they are unjust laws. They do not embody what we know to be the moral principles of the natural law. Okay, there are lots of other famous 20th century natural law thinkers, but that's just one example. Okay, before I enter into some objections, are there any comments or questions so far? Okay, shoot, I'm kind of at time, aren't I? All right, well, hold on. I'm just getting started. Okay, so let me ask you guys a question. I would imagine we're probably, it's HBU, Christian background. We're probably in a natural law-friendly crowd. Do you guys agree with the natural law? Does this make sense as a way of thinking about human morality? It's a trap. Oh, come on. Somebody just put yourself out there and say, I agree.
I agree. Natural law is the way to go.
Okay. Where is it? That's the big objection, right? The big objection to the natural law. I can look at the laws of the state of Texas and I can read them off of a ledger or something, right? But you speak to me of this non-codified, disorganized, non-codified set of moral principles that we have in our heads. Show me. Right? That's the big objection, okay? Big objection is it's this invisible thing, this we know not what. And since we cannot see it and put our fingers on it, touch it like we can touch this desk in front of us, why should we think that it exists? Okay, and objectors or opponents of natural law down through the centuries have said human morality is man-made, we make it up. To say that it is built into human minds by God or something, built into the natural world by God, is to make claims about stuff that's just fictional, right? It's just a fiction to think that there is in your head some body of moral principles that, we can never actually access. Okay, there's some other objections to natural law too. Like the existence of moral diversity is an objection, although that's pretty easily dealt with. But the big objection is the invisibility objection. Why should I believe in something if it's not actually available to my senses? The natural law theorist says, well, it's indirectly available. You can see its effects. You can't see it directly, but you can see it by virtue of its effects. Namely, we all feel this moral sense. And we all feel as though we need to abide by this moral sense. Whatever it is, we feel as though we should live by it. But the fact remains, you can't ever actually see the moral sense. You can't ever put your finger on it. Okay.
It's like working backwards. It's like, well, there could be other reasons why we feel that way.
Right. Sure. Okay, so that's all I got today. There are some other objections. I didn't get to them today. Maybe we'll get to them next time. We're going to do divine command theory next time. I may or may not be offering you guys an excerpt from Jerry Wells and Dave Baggett's book, Good God. I may find another excerpt that's a little easier to process. We'll see. But anyway, we will finish these objections up on Wednesday, and we'll also do some divine command theory on Wednesday. Cool?